What if the man who divorced a supermodel for his maid became Chicago's most beloved millionaire? Have you ever felt more alone surrounded by beautiful things than you did with nothing at all? That crushing moment when you realize that everything you thought you wanted has left you emptier than when you had nothing to lose? Millionaire's marriage meltdown, screamed the Chicago Tribune. Model wife walks away from fortune, declared the Sun-Times. Every gossip blog from Michigan Avenue to Madison Street buzzed with the same question. How does Chicago's youngest self-made millionaire lose the most photographed woman in America? But they were asking the wrong question. Benedict Rowe stood in his penthouse, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the entire city skyline, holding divorce papers that felt heavier than his first $1 million contract. 2 years of marriage to Katerina Voss, international model, magazine cover regular, walking definition of perfection, was officially over. The silence was deafening. If you've ever chosen real over perfect, hit that like button, because what happened next will completely change how you think about love, worth, and what it really means to be rich. But this isn't about trading up. It's about waking up. 3 months earlier, Benedict's marble halls had echoed with the clicking of Katerina's designer heels and the artificial laughter she reserved for photographers. Their marriage was performance art, perfectly choreographed for charity galas, flawlessly executed for business dinners, completely hollow when the cameras stopped rolling. They lived like elegant strangers sharing expensive real estate. Benedict would come home from 16-hour days building his tech empire to find Katerina preparing for another photo shoot, another magazine interview, another appearance that required her to be everywhere except present in their marriage. Their conversations revolved around schedules, appearances, and maintaining the image that kept both their careers thriving. "We look good together," Katerina would say, adjusting his tie before another public event. It was the closest thing to affection their relationship offered. The breaking point came during a charity auction where they donated a romantic dinner for two at their penthouse. Benedict watched couples bid enthusiastically for the chance to share an evening in what they assumed was a love nest. The winning couple paid $15,000 for something Benedict and Katerina had never actually experienced, a romantic dinner together in their own home. That night, after the last guest left and the catering staff cleaned up, Benedict found himself alone in his massive kitchen, eating leftover appetizers, while Katerina was already on a plane to New York for a morning shoot. He owned a penthouse that could house 20 families. She graced magazine cover seen by millions. Together, they were worth more than most small countries. Apart, they were nothing to each other. The divorce was mutual, quiet, and surprisingly painless. No fighting over assets, no bitter accusations. Just two people acknowledging that they'd built something beautiful that had never actually been real. When Katerina's moving truck pulled away from the building, Benedict expected relief. Instead, he discovered something worse than an unhappy marriage: complete emptiness. Every echo in those marble halls reminded him that he'd spent 2 years of his life performing happiness for an audience that didn't actually care whether he was happy or not. The penthouse that had once felt like a crown now felt like a beautiful prison. He had everything the world wanted, and nothing his heart needed. That's when she walked into his life. Not with designer heels clicking on marble floors, but with secondhand sneakers squeaking on hardwood. Not carrying designer handbags, but pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies. Not seeking his attention, but carefully avoiding his gaze while she restored order to his chaotic world. Lena Moreno started as his part-time maid. She ended up becoming the woman who taught him what wealth really means. The tabloids would later call it scandalous. His friends would call it insanity. But Benedict would call it the first real thing that had ever happened to him. Sometimes a person who changes your life doesn't arrive in a limousine. Sometimes she arrives on a city bus, wearing clothes from discount stores and carrying dreams bigger than your bank account. This is a story of how a millionaire learned that the richest love comes from the most unexpected places. He had everything the world wanted, and nothing his heart needed. To understand how Benedict Rowe became the loneliest millionaire in Chicago, you need to see him where the cameras never went. Not in the boardroom where Fortune 500 executives hung on his every word, but in his kitchen at 2 a.m., eating cold pizza while scrolling through social media posts of couples who actually seemed to enjoy each other's company. The man who'd built Road Digital from a garage startup into a tech empire worth $200 million couldn't figure out how to build a marriage that felt real for longer than a photo opportunity. Benedict's success story was the kind that business magazines loved to feature. Dropped out of Northwestern at 22 with nothing but a laptop and an idea for revolutionizing digital marketing algorithms. Slept on friends' couches for 8 months while coding 18 hours a day. Landed his first major client through sheer determination and a presentation that made grown executives weep. By 30, he owned a penthouse that architectural magazines called a masterpiece of modern luxury. By 32, he'd married Katerina Voss, whose face had launched 1,000 magazine covers and whose presence at his side had tripled his company's media coverage overnight. From the outside, Benedict Rowe had won at life. From the inside, he was drowning in expensive emptiness. The marriage had been a business, merger disguised as a romantic fairy tale. Katerina needed a wealthy husband to transition from modeling into lifestyle branding. Benedict needed a glamorous wife to soften his image as the ruthless tech genius who'd crushed 3 competitors before his 30th birthday. Their first date had been scheduled by their respective publicists. Their proposal had been planned by a team of marketing consultants who analyzed which restaurant would generate the most positive media coverage. Their wedding had been featured in 6 magazines and watched by millions online. Not once during the entire courtship had either of them asked the other what they actually wanted from life. The penthouse told the story of their relationship better than any tabloid ever could. Katerina's wing featured floor-to-ceiling mirrors, professional lighting equipment, and enough designer clothing to stock a boutique. Benedict's wing contained his home office, a gym he never used, and a bedroom where he slept alone more nights than not. The main living areas, the spaces where couples typically shared meals, watched movies, or simply talked about their days, remained pristine and unused, like museum displays of what domestic happiness might look like if anyone actually lived there. Their evening routine had become a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. Katerina would return from photo shoots or appearances disappearing into her bathroom for elaborate skincare routines that took hours. Benedict would work until exhaustion in his office, emerging only when he was certain she was already asleep. Weekend mornings found them sitting at opposite ends of their marble kitchen island, scrolling through phones while their coffee grew cold. Katerina checking her follower count and booking notifications. Benedict reviewing quarterly reports and acquisition proposals. The Hartwell Charity Gala is next Friday. Katerina would announce without looking up, with a navy Armani. It photographs better under their lighting. Fine, Benedict would reply, not asking what charity they were supporting or why it mattered. He'd learned early that the cause was less important than the guest list and photo opportunities. Do you know what it's like to have everything and feel like you have nothing? The breaking point should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. At the Children's Hospital fundraiser, the one where they'd raised $3 million for pediatric cancer research, Benedict found himself watching the real couples in attendance. Hospital administrators who'd been married for 20 years, holding hands while discussing their shared passion for helping sick children. Young doctors whose faces lit up when they talked about their spouses' work in different departments. Meanwhile, he and Katerina posed for photographers, their smiles perfectly calibrated, their body language expertly arranged by handlers who understood that the image of their marriage was worth millions in endorsement deals and social influence. During the auction, when the auctioneer announced that the Rowe family had donated a private dinner at their penthouse, Benedict watched other couples bid enthusiastically. The winning couple, a surgeon and his teacher wife, paid $15,000 for the chance to share what they assumed would be a romantic evening in a home filled with love. Benedict realized he couldn't remember the last time he and Katerina had eaten dinner together without photographers, business associates, or some agenda requiring their united front. The divorce conversation happened over breakfast on a Tuesday morning. No drama, no accusations, just 2 exhausted people admitting they'd built something beautiful that had never actually been real. "We look good together," Katerina said, the same phrase she'd used throughout their marriage. "But that's not enough anymore, is it?" "No," Benedict admitted. "It's not." The paperwork was handled by lawyers who specialized in discreet celebrity divorces. The media statements were crafted by publicists who spun the split as mutual respect and continued friendship. The moving trucks arrived during business hours when paparazzi were less likely to be watching. Within 48 hours, Katerina was gone, and Benedict discovered that removing a loveless marriage only revealed the deeper problem. He'd forgotten how to connect with another human being authentically. The penthouse that had once felt like a trophy now felt like a beautiful tomb. Every echo reminded him that he'd spent 2 years performing happiness for an audience that cared more about his image than his actual well-being. He owned everything he'd ever dreamed of owning. He'd achieved every goal he'd set for himself. He was featured on magazine covers as one of America's most successful young entrepreneurs. And he was completely, utterly alone. That's when Lina Moreno knocked on his door, carrying cleaning supplies and perspective that would change everything he thought he knew about wealth worth and what it really means to be rich. She cleaned his house but illuminated his world. Lina Moreno arrived at the Row penthouse on a Thursday morning, carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies and wearing sneakers that had seen better decades. The building's concierge barely looked up as she signed in. Domestic staff was invisible in buildings like this, part of the machinery that kept wealthy lives running smoothly. Benedict was on a conference call when he first heard her voice, drifting to the penthouse walls like something he'd forgotten existed. Genuine laughter, not the practice sound Katerina had perfected for cameras, but the spontaneous joy of someone who found actual humor in everyday moments. Through his office window, he watched Lina chat with the doorman's elderly father, who'd been visiting the building for 20 years, but whom most residents treated like furniture. She was teaching him simple English phrases while he taught her what he called proper Chicago pronunciation of street names. Their conversation was punctuated by mutual laughter over their linguistic mistakes. Lina Moreno was 28, a Cuban-American immigrant who'd arrived in Miami at age 12 with her mother and younger brother after her father's death. While her mother cleaned office buildings at night, Lina had excelled in school, earning a partial scholarship to nursing school before financial reality forced her to defer her dreams and work full-time. She cleaned houses during the day, waited tables 3 evenings a week, and sent half her wages to her mother in Miami, where her brother was fighting leukemia with treatments that cost more than most people earned in a year. But what set Lina apart wasn't her work ethic. Chicago was full of people grinding multiple jobs to survive. What made her extraordinary was her ability to find dignity and purpose in every task, no matter how mundane others considered it. Benedict discovered this on his second day home after the divorce, when he found his father's collection of vintage science fiction novels arranged not by title or author, but by the color of their spines, creating a rainbow across his bookshelf that somehow made the entire room feel warmer. "I hope you don't mind," Lina said when she noticed him studying the arrangement. "Books are like people. Sometimes they look better when you see them differently." The next week, he found his father's old Leica camera cleaned and positioned on his desk, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Maybe you'll find memories here. Film is in the kitchen drawer. LM." Benedict hadn't touched that camera since his father's funeral 15 years earlier. The roll of film Lina had left turned out to be shots his father had taken of Benedict's college graduation. Photos Benedict never knew existed, showing his father's proud face in the crowd, while Benedict walked across the stage. That evening, Benedict found himself waiting in the kitchen when Lina arrived for her next cleaning day. "The camera," he said simply. "Thank you." Lina smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "My father was a photographer in Havana. He always said cameras hold memories even when we forget they're there." It was the beginning of conversations that would change everything. Comment if you believe small gestures have big impact, because what Lina did next transformed a millionaire's understanding of wealth itself. Benedict started timing his coffee breaks to coincide with Lina's work schedule. Their conversations began tentatively, him asking about her family, her sharing stories about her mother's determination to build a life in a new country despite speaking no English and having no money. She cleaned the same office building for 12 years, Lina told him while organizing his home office. Every night, she'd practice English by reading the business papers people left behind. Said she wanted to understand the world her children would grow up in. Lina's stories painted a picture of wealth that had nothing to do with bank accounts. Wealth was her mother working double shifts to pay for her brothers. Medication. Wealth was neighbors in their Miami apartment building sharing food when money ran short. Wells was the elderly man at the bus stop who taught her to read bus schedules when she first moved to Chicago, asking nothing in return except that she someday help another newcomer. Real richness, Lena said, watering plants that have been dying under Katerina's neglect, comes from how many people you lift up, not how high you climb yourself. Benedict found himself looking forward to her visits with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Not because she cleaned his house. He could afford any cleaning service in the city, but because she brought something money couldn't buy, authentic human connection. She sang softly in Spanish while she worked, melodies that filled the penthouse's empty spaces with warmth. She left small touches everywhere. Fresh flowers arranged in glasses because he didn't own proper vases. His coffee maker program with blends she discovered at a local market. Windows open to let fresh air replace the recycled atmosphere of his climate-controlled isolation. Most importantly, she saw him. Not Benedict Rowe the millionaire, not the CEO or the eligible bachelor or the man whose marriage had just failed publicly. Just Benedict, a person who'd forgotten how to connect with the world around him. For the first time in years, he looked forward to coming home. The kitchen became his boarding with a heart, where conversations over coffee taught him more about life than any business school had managed. He was falling in love with everything he'd never learned to value: simplicity, authenticity, and the radical act of caring about someone whose dreams were bigger than their bank account. For the first time in years, he looked forward to coming home. The transformation happened gradually, like sunrise creeping across a landscape that had been dark for too long. Benedict found himself scheduling fewer evening meetings, declining dinner invitations that would have seemed essential just months before. His assistant noticed he was leaving the office by 6 instead of staying until midnight, but she wisely kept her observations to herself. The reason was simple. Lena worked late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Benedict had discovered that conversations with someone who genuinely cared about his thoughts were more valuable than any networking event on Michigan Avenue. "How was your day?" became a question with real meaning. Not the hollow social ritual he performed with Katerina, but genuine curiosity about another person's experiences, struggles, and small victories. Lena would share stories about her nursing classes. She resumed her education, taking evening courses at Malcolm X College while maintaining her work schedule. Benedict found himself celebrating her A- in anatomy more enthusiastically than he'd celebrate his own company's latest acquisition. "Professor Martinez says I have natural instinct for patient care," Lena told him one evening while organizing his kitchen. "My mother thinks I'm crazy for going back to school at my age, but my father always said education was the one thing nobody could take from you." Benedict watched her stack dishes with the same careful attention she brought to everything, and realized he was witnessing something he'd never encountered. Someone pursuing dreams not for status or money, but for the pure desire to help heal others. The crisis that brought them together happened on a freezing February night, when Benedict found Lena crying in his garden. Her landlord had raised her rent by $300. Gentrification pushing longtime residents out of neighborhoods they'd called home for decades. With her brother's medical bills consuming most of her income and her mother's hours cut at the cleaning company, Lena faced eviction within 30 days. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes when Benedict approached. "I shouldn't be out here. I'll finish inside and leave." "Don't apologize for being human," Benedict said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "Tell me what's wrong." When she explained her situation, Benedict's first instinct was to write a check that would solve everything. But something in Lena's posture, proud, dignified, determined, stopped him. "The guest suite upstairs has been empty since my marriage ended," he said carefully. "It has its own entrance, full kitchen, completely private. If you're interested, I could use someone to house sit. The building requires residents to have someone present for security reasons." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Lena's eyes flashed with understanding. "I won't accept charity, Mr. Benedict. If I stay here, I pay rent. $200 a month," he said quickly. "Market rate for house-sitting services." They both knew Chicago market rates were 10 times that amount. They also both knew that Lena's pride was non-negotiable, and that Benedict respected her too much to argue. $200, and I maintain my cleaning schedule," Lena countered. "This is business, not charity." "Business," Benedict agreed, though they both knew this was something else entirely. Word traveled fast in Benedict's social circles. The building's doorman noticed the same woman coming and going at different hours. His housekeeper mentioned that someone was living in the guest suite. Within 2 weeks, whispers were circulating through Chicago's elite social network. Benedict Rowe and the maid became a phrase whispered over champagne at gallery openings and murmured during intermission at the symphony. The speculation ranged from amusing to vicious. "Maybe he's having a midlife crisis," suggested Margaret Whitman at the Arts Council board meeting. "Men do strange things after divorce." "It's probably just temporary," offered Charles Pemberton during drinks at the Union League Club. "He'll come to his senses once he starts dating again." But the whispers that reached Benedict's ears weren't all dismissive. Some carried an uglier edge. A millionaire and his maid? How progressive. One Society columnist wrote in a piece that managed to be simultaneously condescending and cruel, though one wonders what they possibly have in common beyond convenient living arrangements. Benedict's family lawyer, Harrison Clark, requested an emergency meeting. "Benedict, I need to address some concerns," Harrison said, sliding a folder across the conference table. "There are rumors circulating that could affect your business relationships. Some of your investors are asking questions about your living situation." "My living situation is my private business," Benedict replied evenly. "Not when you're a public figure," Harrison countered. "The appearance of impropriety, even without actual impropriety, can be costly. I'm not saying anything inappropriate is happening, but I am saying that perception matters in your world." Your world. As if Benedict's world was separate from the world where people like Lena existed. But something unexpected was stirring within Benedict. Something stronger than concern about other people's opinions. Hope. For the first time in years, he experienced genuine anticipation about the future. Share this if you think love doesn't care about bank accounts. Because what Benedict felt for Lena was about to defy every social rule Chicago's elite had spent generations enforcing. Their connection had deepened beyond friendship into something that scared him with its intensity. This wasn't the calculated partnership he'd had with Katerina. This was the deep, healing love he'd yearned for all his life without knowing how to find it. When Benedict made his decision to propose to Lena over her homemade Arroz con Pollo instead of at some exclusive restaurant designed to impress photographers, he knew he was choosing authenticity over approval, substance over surface. He was choosing love over everything else his world valued. The question was whether his world would choose to accept that decision, or whether it would try to destroy the first real thing that had ever happened to him. He proposed with his heart, not his wallet. The proposal happened on a Tuesday night in Benedict's kitchen, over Lena's homemade Arroz con Pollo, and the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who truly know each other. No ring hidden in champagne glasses, no photographer lurking in bushes, no carefully orchestrated moment designed for social media immortality. Just a man who'd finally learned the difference between performance and authenticity, asking the woman who'd taught him that difference to share the rest of his life. "I love you," Benedict said simply, setting down his fork and looking directly into Lena's eyes. "Not because you're convenient or beautiful or because you make me look good to other people. I love you because you make me want to be worthy of the life I've been given." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Benedict, I know this complicates everything," he continued. "I know people will say terrible things about your motives and my judgment. But I also know that every day with you has been more real than every year before you." He reached across the table and took her hands, hands that were calloused from work, strong from purpose, gentle from natural compassion. "Marry me, Lena, not because it makes sense to anyone else, but because it makes sense to us." Her yes was whispered in Spanish first, then English, sealed with a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and the kind of future neither of them had dared to imagine. The world exploded within hours. Benedict's assistant fielded 37 calls the morning after news leaked. Social media erupted with commentary ranging from bewildered to vicious. The Tribune's gossip column ran a piece titled, "From Penthouse to Cleaning House, Benedict Rowe's Surprising Choice." But it was his inner circle's reaction that cut deepest. "Are you out of your mind?" demanded his business partner, David Chun, during an emergency meeting at their downtown offices. Do you have any idea what this looks like? A millionaire marrying his maid? It's a cliché, Benedict. A bad one. His college roommate, Marcus, was more direct. She's using you, man. Wake up before she takes half of everything you built. Even his mother, calling from a retirement community in Scottsdale, couldn't hide her dismay. Darling, I'm sure she's a lovely girl, but have you considered the practical implications? What will you possibly talk about at dinner parties? The cruelest reaction came from Katerina herself, reached by reporters outside a Manhattan restaurant, where she was dining with her latest photographer boyfriend. Benedict's always been impulsive, she said, her smile perfectly calibrated for the cameras. I'm sure this is just a phase. He'll come to his senses once the novelty wears off. A phase, as if the deepest love of his life was equivalent to collecting vintage cars or taking up skiing. Social media was merciless. Instagram comments dissected every photo of them together. Twitter threads analyzed their obvious incompatibility. Facebook groups formed to discuss whether this was genuine love or elaborate performance art. The gold digger accusations were the most painful for Lena to endure. Strangers who knew nothing about her life, her family, her dreams, reduced her to a stereotype with vicious confidence. She saw dollar signs the moment she walked into that penthouse, wrote one particularly vicious blogger, classic predator behavior, target a lonely divorced man, and play the humble immigrant card until the ring's on her finger. But what the critics didn't expect was how Benedict and Lena responded to the assault. Instead of hiding or offering defensive explanations, they stood together. Benedict gave exactly one interview to Chicago Magazine, where he spoke with quiet dignity about finding authentic love after years of performing happiness. People who reduce Lena to a gold digger reveal more about their own values than hers, he said. She's pursuing her nursing degree while working multiple jobs to support her family. She's teaching me what real wealth looks like, and it has nothing to do with bank accounts. Lena, for her part, continued her normal routine. Classes, work, family obligations. When reporters ambushed her outside Malcolm X College, she smiled politely and said, I fell in love with a good man who happens to be wealthy, not a wealthy man who happens to be good. If people can't see the difference, that says more about them than about us. The wedding planning became an act of defiance. Instead of the elaborate society event everyone expected, they chose simplicity. Lena's extended family flew in from Miami. Benedict's handful of true friends, the ones who cared more about his happiness than his image, filled out the small guest list. No magazine deals, no celebrity planners, no photographer whose work would appear in Architectural Digest. Just two people who'd found each other across impossible circumstances, surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to celebrate their love. The ceremony took place in the penthouse garden where Lena had once cried over eviction notices and where Benedict had first offered her sanctuary. The same space where their friendship had deepened into love, where they'd shared countless conversations about dreams and fears and the kind of future they wanted to build together. The world tried to shame him back into his gilded cage, but Benedict had learned something invaluable. Authentic love was worth more than social approval. As they exchanged vows with the Chicago skyline as their backdrop, both knew they were choosing each other over everything their separate worlds had taught them to value. Thank you for your time. Share, like, and subscribe for more interesting stories. See you next time.